came from that basic assumption.
Say it again for the camera.
That Romantics mistook the hero of Paradise Lost by Milton. They thought that Satan was the hero. Satan was actually what would be termed now an anti-hero, and it was actually Adam that's the hero. Satan is, since he's acting on Adam, he is essentially, Adam is where all the action is focused. So what the Romantics thought, and Blake is no exception, and he was very proud of this idea. He thought that he was trying to defend Milton from a lot of his detractors by saying, well, Satan is the hero, and he's almost like he's saying no one understands this, but it turns out it's not right. You know, all these years later, a lot of critics looked at it and said, no, it's Adam's the hero. You know, because Adam is the one that really is the entire focus of all the action of the book, because he's the one that has to redeem, you know, he's the one that faces the trials and tribulations. Mm-hmm. He's the one that, essentially, he's the one that is the focus of redemption in Paradise Lost. And of course, obviously, you know, Paradise Revisited is, or Paradise Regained is where they're actually redeemed, quote unquote, through Jesus. But you know, God's up in the sky, and he's, you know, in Paradise Lost, you know, he's a likable guy, you know, but, and then, you know, he speaks to Jesus a couple of times in the beginnings of the book, but, you know, the hero is actually Adam.
But, if you remember, there's a huge difference between, number one, Satan and Lucifer, number one. Number two, why do you think it was necessary, then, to portray Lucifer in a more sympathetic light in Paradise Lost?
Because he plays a role in their fall and redemption, and because to some degree, and the way the Romantics saw it is they saw Satan as a Promethean figure. You know, he basically sees the injustice that God allows, and he's telling him, you know, eat shit, basically. You know, I want to take control. But at the same time, isn't portrayed as entirely in a favorable light. He is seen
not entirely, yeah. I mean,
he's seen as being almost human in his faults. You know, his kind of independence and his, you know, wanting to do what he wants instead of as what God wants.
Well, maybe in that case, maybe he wanted to fashion a person out of his own image then, because he knew they would have faults.
You know what? It's funny what he says in the book. He says he's the one that says one of the most often quoted phrases from Paradise Lost. He says, "The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a hell of heaven, a heaven of hell." Which actually he's justifying. You know, he basically is telling his legions, "We're gonna make this hell that we just got thrown into a paradise because we're here and we have to." You know, yeah. That's pretty much what he's saying. But so what you're seeing there is hell being compared to some form of consciousness. He says the mind is its own place. So you see a kind of an odd way of him saying that heaven and hell are states of mind. You know, and it's not just he has this allegory both within and without, because hell in the book is a real place. You know, this is really where Satan is put. But then he says, you know, he's saying the mind is its own place as he's in hell, and he's referring to hell and heaven as states of mind more than actual places. And really, the thing that a lot of critics now say, that the entire point of Paradise Lost was to literally, quote unquote, justify the ways of God to men, which is essentially what Milton was trying to do, because he was a very Christian man, he's a very conventional man. You know, he was in favor of, you know, trying to explain to people why the world is why it is, and why that, you know, God exists, and why God has this certain kinds of behaviors, and I mean, that was kind of the impression I was under. I don't think Milton was necessarily the best person, because you know, he beat his daughters, but he beat his daughters because they would get the words wrong of his poem. You know, he'd read them recite off the top of his head, you know, what he wanted in his poetry, and they would notate. And then they'd have him. She would read it back, and he'd beat the shit out of her if she got anything wrong.
That's lovely. What a father.
Another person that used to notate, you know, have to dictate their work to somebody. Henry James was going blind in his later years.
That's right. Oh, wait. Who was the poet who, like, he went blind in his later years and he had somebody notate for him?
That was Milton.
That was Milton.
He had his daughter notate.
Okay, so that was. Well, I mean, no, I'm not trying to sound. I mean, I'm not trying to sound like cruel or anything, but how would he be able to hear if he couldn't see her? Would it be like, get over here, you, get over here?
Well, I guess at the time women were subservient, and he would just say, get your ass over here.
Despicable.
I don't know. He was weird. He also, as humans do, he wrote a lot of tracts, political tracts on divorce, where he's basically defending the right of divorce. He uses the Bible to defend the right of divorce because he himself was divorced. That's all it came down to. He was excusing his own.
So, to you, what do you consider the difference between Dante's Lucifer and Milton's Lucifer?
Dante's Lucifer is allegory. He's at the center of hell. His mouth is chewing on people who are the emblems of betrayal, of some form of betrayal, whether it's betrayal of country to country, betrayal to, your fellow people. He had Brutus and Cassius in the mouth of Satan. So I think he's making it more allegorical than when Milton is doing, is portraying Satan as an actor in the theater of the sublime. He's actually doing things. He's not just serving as a poetic representation.
Wait, theater of the sublime. Could you expand on that?
Well, roughly how turning theatrics, certain kinds of motions. It has a plot. The Paradise Lost has a plot. This happens, and then this next thing happens. It works almost like a play. It's a story. It's an epic.
Yeah, I thought it was like, personally, I thought, I thought Paradise Lost, that was more of like a theatrical epic rather.
Right, and
But then again, same with Divine Comedy. I thought it was more like.
No, it's not theatrical at all. It's allegorical. Because each time he goes into another circle of hell, where he puts people, he gives them these punishments that reflect on the acts that got him in hell. He has, people that are getting their feet burned, and there are people that are frozen and can't move, and all these different things, because he does this to kind of demonstrate the nature of sin itself, i.e. the sin itself, I think.
But you don't think besides it being allegorical, you don't think like a certain theatrical element was added? Especially considering like back then, with the Greek and Roman theater.
You're talking about Dante? Well, well, Dante was further along than at least the ancient Greeks. He was like 16, 15.
Oh, I know. Wait. No, I thought he was before early 1500s.
Yeah, I think
yeah.
He had an interesting life. He had a life that I actually relate to, because I don't remember, but he had some kind of estrangement from his mother and father, and I think he was put in a foster family, and they died. His family died. There was actually a period in Dante's life where he studied philosophy like for a long time, very concentrated study, and eventually he said, this isn't teaching me anything, this is not telling me anything about anything, so he gave it up and went to poetry, because he felt poetry could say more than philosophy could. Well, I think that philosophy is more integrated into Milton than in Dante, of course, because Milton actually, he goes into like the sciences, the discoveries in science at the time, and he's being more of an instructor, not morally instructing, like I said, he's justifying the ways of God to men, which isn't really a moral instruction. It's more like explaining the ways of God, so people, to further their understanding. So he's being more instructive. Dante is actually trying to provide you with a morality, but he's using allegory. Of course, at the very beginning, when he says he awoke to find himself in a dark wood, that's his dark uncertainties. He's uncertain about God. One day, he says he's he's lived with this kind of faithlessness and this godlessness, and one day he wakes up and he's in midlife, and he suddenly feels he's turning towards God and looking for guidance, and so he goes on in the beginnings, the first canto of the Inferno, to talk about this leopard and these different animals that are guarding him from getting to this hill, where he's going to meet Virgil, who's his guide, guide up through hell. But he's, from what I remember, I haven't read the other two parts of Dante's Divine Comedy, but
wait, back up. You haven't?
No, I haven't read all of it. I've only read the Inferno.
Huh? I didn't know that. I thought you read the entire.
I had a hard when I was interested in Dante. I didn't have the other two books, but
he did write. Other than that, I'm pretty
Vita
sure, right?
Nuovo, he wrote the Vita Nuovo, which was his early.
Oh, that's right, the Vita Nova.
Yeah, and that's trying good piece, isn't it? What he's trying to say in that
that's a poem, right?
No, it's a bunch of poems, a lot of sonnets.
Oh, really?
And he explains in each sonnet how it's structured and how it's what he's trying to say, what he's questioning, what he's because he has some interesting dreams and stuff that he explains that he had this dream and he wrote this sonnet. That's the very beginning anyway. He has a dream about love, and what it is he has love come to him with his love Beatrice in his arms, and he pulls his heart and he eats the heart. Love eats the heart, and so Dante's like, he wakes up and he writes to some of his favorite poets that are in Italian. He writes to him and says, "What does this dream mean?" And they all propose ideas about what it means. And one of them said, "Well, what you witnessed is love. The nature of love." And so it's very interesting. I mean, I don't know exactly how you could explain the difference between Milton's Satan and Dante's Satan. For me, I don't know for sure, but I think Dante is looking at religion and its fundamental truths more as reflections of nature, and especially human nature. But Milton is trying to literally justify the ways of God to men. So he's looking more at the fall of man, and how this was supposed to be part of the entire process of redemption and of that sort. And he's trying to basically explain why life is situated to a certain degree, and why Christian religion is profound and things like that. I think so the difference is really symbolism versus symbolism to explore human behavior and its consequences, versus a man trying to kind of talk about big ideas and like I said, Dante, to my knowledge, Dante never really throws in there things about science or whatever's going on in the world. He's more like fixated on human behavior and human nature, and especially the effects that sin has on human nature. At least in the Inferno. The rest I don't really know.
Alright, here, you take the wheel for a while.
Suck my cock.
There you go.
Oh, blow me. Hey, look, it's Zach. He's standing around looking like a man. What are you doing, Zach?
Just speaking literature with my buddy.
Talking and token.
Talking and token on the toothpick.
He's token on the toothpick, making me sick.
I'm such a prude. I actually consider these my cigarettes.
My funky. I know. I'm like, what's the deal with my phone? It just keeps ringing at me.
So, as I was saying to you before, you read that one lay from where Loki tricks the dwarf. There's this other one.
You know, one of the funniest things I've ever read in romantic literature is Percy Shelley has a poem where he's sitting under a tree and he's moaning. You know, he's upset because somebody he loves doesn't love him or something like that. And it's funny because he uses the phrase "make sweet moan," and it's funny. I look at that and I'm like, what is sweet moan? Like he's baking some bread or some cookies or something. But no, when I looked at that, at first I thought maybe he was playing with himself under a tree in the fields. You know, I was like, guy's playing with his balls. Yeah, he fell in love and the woman didn't love him, so he went and jerked off under a tree. Okay, that makes sense, right? Isn't that great?
It's so great.
The Romantics were secretly very, very what do you call it? Exhibitionary. Actually, Rousseau, who was counted as one of the early Romantics,
Voyeuristic.
Yeah, voyeur. Yeah, I've gone back to thinking about Rousseau. He was very interesting as well. A lot of these, like their parents hated them or something, and didn't treat them right. And I think Rousseau was another one that wound up in foster care, I think by his grandparents or something. And he grew up and he had like these 5 kids, and he put them in foster homes. And he talked about he was another one of these family values people, you know. And Voltaire called him out. I mean, him and Voltaire really had it out a lot of times.
Was he a great candidate?
Candidate.
Hey,
I've read Candide. That book is so ironic and snug and just it's brutal and it's hilarious because he's like,
want to watch me pull a hat out of a bookcase? Watch this, folks. This trick. It's only going to work once.
No, drugs. What the hell is this guy doing? How did you put that there?
I don't know. I think for some reason I think I saw it there. Some part of me said, "Hey, you want to be a fun idea? I'm going to take off my hat and put it behind the bookcase because that's where it belongs."
You're pretty stupid, okay?
Oh, you know this. So, was it Shelley or Coleridge who wrote Ozymandias?
That would be Shelley.
Okay.
Yeah, Shelley wrote Ozymandias, and I like that was one of the first poems I read by him. It's funny, when I was in high school, what I would do is I'd go into bookstores and I'd search a poet whose name I'd never heard. I found Shelley one day. I was like, hey, this is awesome, and I took it to my English teacher. I was like, this is an unknown poet. You know, it's like he's an unknown, and
unknown.
And she looked at me like she didn't say anything. She just looked at me like, Dustin, you're stupid. You know. She gave me this look like, yeah, you keep saying that, because I would find weird things and say, I would say like I don't no, this guy's never been heard of or whatever. I was real fond of discovering new things, and I'd come to her and say, look what I found. It's Ernest Hemingway. No one's ever heard of this guy. She's like, we're teaching that next year, well, that's what happens when you're secretly stupid.
Well, hey, that's what happens.
I did the same thing with James Joyce. I bought her Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, and I said, I had read the first like 10 or 15 pages of it, and it's funny because there's a section, he's in Catholic school, and there's a point where he says, when it's late at night and they're about to shut the lights out at the school and you're supposed to lay down and go to sleep, he thought if he didn't get his clothes off and lay down in bed before the lights went off, he was going to hell, and he really thought it, and he made fun of that. And I read that, and I was like, yeah, I kind of feel this is what Catholic school does to people. I brought it to her, my teacher in Catholic school, and I said, James Joyce, no one knows who this guy is because he made fun of Catholicism. And she's like, what?
Here, I wanted to repeat some sayings of the high ones, because if
guys were always on marijuana.
That one nocturne reading we went to.
Why does God call himself the Most High? I smoke marijuana than that asshole.
Hey.
Making fun of the Lord.
I mean, what do I care, right? Who am I to... am I to talk? As the current Pope says, who am I to judge? When we were at that one nocturne reading, and
Drugs.
And this is pretty much the Norse version of Proverbs.
Oh yes, I remember you.
Happy is the man who hears of himself well-meant words of praise. It's hard to know what may be hidden in another man's mind. And I love buying used books. Part of the reason is I love seeing the notes that the reader takes. So, the beer isn't such a blessing to men as it's supposed to be. The more you swallow, the less you stay the master of your mind. And and there's an arrow.
Say the Vikings.
There's an arrow, and the note says, drink in moderation.
Whoops.
And the next one's the mind-stealing heron hovers over feasts, waiting to seize men's wits. That bird's feathers fettered me when I came to Gunwad's court. And the words mind-stealing heron are highlighted, and right above it, it says alcohol.
Mind-stealing heron? What about mind-stealing heroin? Isn't heroin supposed to be awesome, though? All those rock stars do heroin, and a lot of rich kids.